Welcome to another episode of On the History Trail. I'm your host and tour guide, Mark Nonestied. On today's episode, we're going to examine the history of the First Reformed Church of New Brunswick, one of the earliest Dutch churches in central New Jersey. We will talk with the Reverend Dr. Hartmut Kramer Mills and tour the inside of this important building. We're even going to get a chance to climb the bell tower and explore the workings of the historic clock and the massive church bell. So sit back and relax and follow me as we travel on the History Trail. Hi, Hartmut. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Mark.
This current structure that we're in was built in 1812, but there was an earlier building here prior to that. So how far back does the congregation go?
Oh, the congregation goes back actually to 1703. Although that was another church. It was called the 3 Mile Run Reformed Church, and by 1717 that church had grown so much that two churches developed.
Okay.
One is the 6 Mile Run Reformed Church in Franklin now, and our church, First Reformed Church in New Brunswick.
So there's an early congregation that's in the area. So when is the first house of worship then built at this site?
At this particular site in 1767, but there were two previous sites. One a little earlier than 1717, and the other one in 1735.
Okay.
But here on these premises, that was in 1767.
Okay.
That church.
And so this is one of the earliest Reformed churches in central New Jersey. How would this congregation have differed from, let's say, the Anglican Church at the time?
It would have first differed simply by being here first. So it was the first colonial church. It's not the oldest in central Jersey. Old Brick in Marlborough is older, but yeah, it was the first church here in New Brunswick, a Dutch colonial church, not part of the Dutch colony, but bearing all the features. It still had the self-understanding of a state church. That means it was all-inclusive. If you were a citizen, you were baptized, you were part of this church. When the British came, they usually built their church, the new state church, next door to the old Dutch church. They would not like disenfranchise us or so. In fact, they would charter our churches just as much as their own churches. But there would be now two churches in several towns in New Jersey next to each other. And sometimes they would even be later built next to each other, even though the historic necessity wasn't there anymore.
Okay.
But there was kind of a tradition to keep it that way, English and Dutch next to each other.
So with the Anglican Church, the English Church, I mean, there are authorities coming from the British Crown. For the Reformed Church, where's the authority coming from? I mean, the hierarchy of the church is where?
Okay, the hierarchy at that time, from late 1700s on, would be in America. Beforehand, it would be the classes of Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
Okay.
Really. So that was really the difference.
So is it correct to say that the early Reformed churches, were they primarily Dutch? But in this region, is it a multicultural mix of congregants?
Yeah, they were by and large, of course, ethnic Dutch churches. Ethnic, of course, is a word of a much later time, but yeah, they were Dutch. For New Brunswick, that was a little bit different because it was really at a crossroads of many things, and traditionally this church was, even back then, a commuter church where many people would meet on a Sunday morning, but they would come from different directions. elections, and because of that, the original membership of this church is not just Dutch. There were French people, there were Walloon people, there was a small German contingent, and of course an English contingent, and you can see this all from the names in the old church records.
So by 1812, when this structure is built, it must have been a sizable congregation. I mean,
Yes.
This is a substantial,
Yes.
substantial building. I mean, do you know how many congregants were part of the congregation at that time?
Not exactly, but I know the number of seats in the pews, and that was a little over 1,200.
1,200. Wow.
So now what you see is much smaller because we had this unfortunate fire in 1971, and it destroyed a lot of the interior of the church. Mainly the front. In the back there was of course the organ, and still is, which is a big organ, has two big organ chambers, and they were not destroyed, but there was quite a bit of smoke damage. But the worst part of the fire was that it destroyed the chancel area, and the congregation by the time was already relatively small. And so they chose, or when they decided that they would stay and not follow other mainline churches into the suburbs, which they could have done really at the time, they chose to make the sanctuary quite a bit smaller. So they moved the wall of the front of the church inward and developed a flight of Sunday school rooms behind it, and had a smaller sanctuary. They also took away lots of the balcony space and cut down the seats that way.
Okay. So, but even though there were these changes, I mean, there's still, I mean, just looking around the sanctuary here, there's still a lot of original or early features that survive.
That's correct.
Such as the balconies and the pews themselves. In fact, there's some interesting features about the pews. Maybe we can take a look at some of those features. So Hartmut, you mentioned about the fire. Even though some things were destroyed, there's quite a lot of historic material that's left in this building, such as these church pews. What do these date from 1812?
Yes, they do, by and large. I mean, what has been replaced and repaired, but really they do. And the special story about them is really that these pews were sold to the congregation according to a plan.
Okay.
And within one winter, from that sale, that theoretic sale, because they weren't in existence yet, the church was able to cover all the costs for the construction of this great sanctuary. So it's really a special story.
Well, I noticed on them there's numbers, and even some of them have name plaques here. I mean, here we can see one from the Wyckoff family. So families would rent these out, and that was a way to raise funding for the church?
Well, they owned them really since they purchased them, and that was their pew then. A very good way of financing the erection of this sanctuary, but of course a problem in later centuries when a church wants to be open and welcoming to everybody, and now you have somebody sitting in my pew.
So I guess it's sort of a status symbol at some point too, I would imagine. I mean, the pews closest towards the front, would they have been the most expensive and then cheaper going towards the...
This I don't know, but it is of course imaginable. And the status, yeah, there was of course status involved with belonging to this church. I think that a good part of the membership was wealthy merchants over the centuries.
Okay.
And so, yeah, you would have a notion of that.
I noticed they have doors on them. I mean, is this to keep the heat in there, or?
Yes. That's exactly what it was meant to do. Before we built a more like a Victorian heating system with grits, elaborate grits and elaborate radiators on the walls, all of which is lost now. But in the post-colonial time, when this church was still built in its colonial style, that was the way of keeping the pews warm. So you had a little door, and you have these footstools in the pews. And you would put your feet on top of these footstools, and you would put a wrapped hot stone or coal or something under the footstool.
Sure. And so these are early as well. Let's take a look at this one here. This actually has someone's name on it. let's see, it looks like Smith, and it has the year as well. What's that? 1880. Looks like 1882. So these are historic or early pieces as well. These footstools.
Yeah, we have found footstools from various different decades, really. Apparently they needed to be replaced at certain points in time, and you can see this kind of carpet over to have it blend in with the carpet. That's, of course, from the 1970s.
Right. Well, it's interesting that, so the upholstery on here is much newer, but the bones of it are much earlier. So Hartmut, this is a replica of a harpsichord, a type of instrument that may have been in the church at one point.
I'm not sure about that, whether it really was in the church. I mean, this is an instrument that's really built according to an Italian school and of the mid-1600s,
Okay.
so that would be a little bit earlier than our church really is. But it is certainly a sign that our church was always involved historically in good music programs. And there was always a very refined taste in good music among our members, and this just bears witness to it. And there's a lot of aesthetic features here to this instrument in particular, and it is quite interesting that it was built particularly for this church, because there are several symbols here that pick up symbols from the antipendiums of the pulpit and the lectern.
So historically, there was a strong music program associated with the church.
A big choir, and for years we had regular performances of Messiah, of Handel's Messiah, for the city of New Brunswick, probably also with other choirs together.
It must have sounded absolutely phenomenal. I mean, in this wonderful open space with the sound emanating through here. I mean, acoustically it probably fit very well.
We have really very good acoustics in this sanctuary.
Great. And so the sound on these harpsichords are, if we were to hit a key or two, they're plucking the string on here. It's not a hammer that's sort of hitting down on it. So Hartmut, these are the stairs then that lead up to the balcony area. So is this where the choir would have been located?
Yes.
Okay.
Up in the choir loft.
Choir loft. Okay. And so the balcony area is part of the early church as well from 1812? Or
yes.
Is it,
yes, was built right then.
So let's. Wow, this is really some space up here. You really get the full effect of the size of this building from here. And how many people did you say fit in here historically? There were?
Historically, a little over 1,200.
Yeah.
And now it's about 600.
Something else.
Yeah.
So what? So you mentioned that the choir would have been up here.
That's correct. The choir would be right behind us. Okay. Those seats.
And so these pews also date from 1812?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly look pretty early. Let's talk a bit about the ministers that were here at this church. What were some of the, Frelinghuysen, I mean, he was a well-known 18th century minister, although he wouldn't have been in this building.
That's right.
He certainly preached to the early congregation. Can you tell me a little bit about him?
Yeah, he was. He came to this new country, really, or a colony back then, in 1720, and he was a German minister who had a congregation on a small island in the North Sea, and his congregation was flooded out, and he was in need of finding a new parish, and he went over the border into the Netherlands, and that was very close, and people would understand each other language-wise enough so that all worked. And he was promised a church in the Netherlands, but they didn't tell him that it would really be in the colonies. and that's actually historically not totally correct, because by that time it was no longer a Dutch colony, but somehow they hid the fact from him that he had to cross the Atlantic Ocean. And there are very nice biographies about him, and also then more like legendary knowledge, how he made that decision to really accept this congregation of Raritan. And he came over here, and he was immediately in conflict with the orthodoxy of the established Dutch church, because he was something like an early pietist, or more of a radical. He was very strong on personal purity and piety, and would regularly not admit members of the church to the Lord's Supper if he felt that they did not lead proper lives, and so forth. And there are lots of stories and things that happened due to his rather radical theological outlook. But he is now known in American church history as a father of the Great Awakening, because his preaching then would later influence other more influential preachers, and would leave a mark really in American church history.
And so, as you mentioned, I mean, he's instrumental in the Great Awakening. I mean, that's the mid-18th century. And so later, there's connections with Rutgers
This
University
is true.
at the time.
Yes, very true. Rutgers University was back then known as Queen's College, and was founded by the Dutch Reformed denomination, really now known as Reformed Church in America. And it was a college that was supposed to provide the young colonial church with ministers, really. And so you needed a good basic education, and then also a seminary education. And that's how the college came into being. And consequently, the early presidents of Rutgers came out of the Dutch Reformed Church. And 4 of them are now buried in our cemetery. It also gives kind of a special role to this church, because relatively often the senior pastor here would be president of the college. And yeah, that's...
So one of the substantial architectural features of the outside of the building is this great bell tower with a clock in it. Can we go up there and take a look at
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Good.
So Hartmut, we climbed a little bit up into the bell tower, and I have to say, on some steps that look like they came out of medieval England. I mean, it really was quite a sight. And so we're in this this little enclosure within the bell tower that houses the clock mechanism. Can you tell me about this piece of equipment?
Yeah, it functions much like when you have a modern skyscraper and a company wants to have an antenna for a cell phone. Then the company would rent the top space of that skyscraper and put up the antenna. The same thing happened here with this clock when New Brunswick had market fairs in front of the church, because this used to be the center of town. So the city fathers wanted to have a clock in a steeple, so that all the business people would know the time. And so they asked the consistory, the leading board of the church, for permission to install this thing. And we have this still in the consistory minutes from 1828. And the clock has functioned since then. There were a number of amendments and improvements done over the years. One of them is electricity, so that it's no longer run purely mechanically with weights, but with a little motor that you see down here. But then About 8 years ago, when my wife and I came as co-pastors to the church, the clock was not running well. It would strike midnight when it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and we had neighbors upset and so forth. And the Mayor Jim Cahill was really kind to listen to our plea to provide the clock with more maintenance. The maintenance was always an issue, but we needed something really better now, and so. There's a company in Harrisburg, Rogers. They were once competitors to the original company that built this clock,
Okay,
Howard.
and I noticed
Yeah.
this says Boston on the side here,
Right.
so Howard and Company,
Right.
Boston. So this piece then was made up in Massachusetts.
So we were able to suggest to the city of New Brunswick to employ this company, Rogers, to take over the maintenance of the clock, and the city of New Brunswick followed, which made us very, very happy, and also provided us with a little computer, which is right behind you now. And the computer sets the time actually when there is a brownout or blackout or daylight savings time. It's really wonderful to have this high-tech stuff connected to an almost Baroque-looking mechanism.
So you have, I guess, some of this mechanism would control the clock itself, and then other parts of it are ringing the bell.
Correct. What rings the bell is over here.
Okay.
And the clock will, the hands are several tiers up in the steeple, but this is the axle that steers that. There are two big rods. I don't know the exact terminology.
Okay.
I'm not a clockmaker, but they go to the four faces of the clock and move the hands. That's called the gears then upstairs, and has been nicely restored.
So can we continue on our journey here up the bell tower and take a look at some of the other features?
Let's do that. This window is I think, the nicest window of the church that's still in its original place. The church was really known for its stained glass windows. In the sanctuary had 23 of them, and they were all destroyed in the fire. And so now everybody says, well, the church lost all her stained glass windows, but it's really not true, because Hiram Square, the side of the church that overlooks Hiram Square, that whole facade still has all the stained glass windows, even though some are fragmented because they were put together after the fire from pieces. But it's a complete side overlooking Hiram Square that has all these windows still intact.
So we're up here in where the bell's located, and I should say that we actually came to a number of different levels before coming up to the steps to get to this section of the bell tower. And what's interesting is we've noticed that we've gone from stone walls, now we have these real massive brick walls here, which is sort of deceiving when you look at the outside of the church, because the bell tower at this point is clad in wood on the outside, but it has these wonderful sturdy brick walls on the interior, which I'm sure makes it a well-built, well-constructed building. So the bell, what time period does this date from?
Well, that's really a question. The bell has the date 1836, but there's a mechanism for ringing the bell with this wheel in behind, and this has been made obsolete by the mechanism that connects the bell to the clock.
Okay.
So the clock comes from 1828 or shortly thereafter, depending how quickly the stipulations in the minutes were carried out. But it would be really difficult to say now exactly what came when and how was it exactly connected.
So on the inside of the bell, we have the original clapper, and then at some point later in time, they reconfigured it with this hammer to strike on the outside of the bell. So then this piece here, this is connected and goes down, I can see down through several stories, down to that clock mechanism that we saw earlier.
Oh, it's very dark up here.
So Hartmut, we're in the part of the bell tower that that has the clock mechanism. So on the outside of these walls here is the face to the clock.
Right.
And this pole here, this is what goes down several stories and connects to the mechanism that we saw earlier. And then comes up through, and we have a series of gears here. So how many sides of the tower have a clock face on it?
All four sides do, and that's why you have this intersection here of these rods. Each one goes to another face and moves the hands on that face.
Okay. Boy, that was that was quite an experience, Hartmut. Tell me, how long have you been involved with the church?
Susan and I came in 2000. Yeah.
So where were you
2000.
before?
Before I was interim pastor in Spotswood, and before that in Germany.
In Germany?
Yeah. Had three little yoked churches on the countryside with unspeakable names, Stößen, Görschen, and Ratewitz. And my wife had, in addition to that, 6 other small countryside churches. But then the denomination announced that my wife would have additional churches beginning in 1999. And we had, at the time, 2 small children, and we couldn't see ourselves having 12 churches. And
what a transition, though! I mean, to come from Germany to Spotswood, and then ultimately to Brunswick.
True,
How was did you feel about that? Did you look forward to coming here?
Well, not entirely, really, because I missed the teaching. That was really what I enjoyed most. But on the other hand, I felt quite welcome at First Reformed Church. Its first pastor, Frelinghuysen, came from Germany, also from the seaside, as I did in Germany originally. So I felt there is some connection, and I'm also very grateful to be here in a congregation that really has some awareness of its history, and is not one of the newer ones. So I feel quite well linked.
Right. Well, we appreciate you showing us around, and thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode as we explored the historic First Reformed Church of New Brunswick and learned about the history of this early structure. For more information, you can visit the church website at firstreformedchurch.net. And for comments or suggestions about the show, you can visit the East Brunswick Public Library website at ebpl.org. Thank you for watching, and come along again as we travel on the History Trail.